Okay. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Mav Kim back to the CSC. As I said in the description of the program, she's done a number of programs for us that have all been excellent. So, bird watching in winter.
And
go to the web, Mav.
Okay, so up here in Vermont, we might not think of winter as a really great time to watch birds, but actually it is. And many people do watch birds in the winter. During the coldest months of the year, large flocks of wonderful birds can be found in our state. The variety, the number of different species, might not be quite as exciting as it is during spring migration, for instance, but for raw numbers, a day spent birding in December or January or February can be purely astonishing. There are often thousands, tens of thousands of diving birds on Lake Champlain. Birders often need spotting scopes to get really good looks, but even when the birds are nothing but distant black and white dots tossing on the icy waves, the numbers are impressive. Here are two examples taken from lists on eBird, that huge citizen science database maintained by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Both counts were submitted by birders who stood under the Champlain Bridge and scanned the water. These are relatively modest counts, given what they've been sometimes. And there are also huge and dramatic raptors flying over Vermont's open lands, like this beautiful female northern harrier. Or handsome and hungry raptors visiting backyard feeders, looking for smaller birds or tasty little rodents to provide the nourishment they need to make it through the winter, like this sharp-shinned hawk. And I think this is just one of the best portraits of the intensity and focus of a raptor looking for food. Just a fabulous photo. It was taken by a woman right here in Jericho. The smaller birds, of course, live their whole lives, constantly alert to the possibility of hungry raptors. But in the spring and summer, those little birds also have other things on their mind. They're busy defending territories, courting, nesting, raising young, and of course, constantly seeking food and constantly keeping an eye out for predators. We usually see the little birds one at a time during spring and summer, and then maybe some family groups come July. But during the winter, many of Vermont's little birds hang out in clusters, in flocks. And the flocks occur because of food sources, such as open agricultural areas, or groups of ornamental fruit trees, or backyard feeders. These birds were under our backyard feeders, and we'll see more of them in just a minute. But first, big flocks of little birds that show up in agricultural areas during the winter. You might be driving along a dirt road, snow on both sides, and all of a sudden there is a veritable explosion of small feathered bodies in shades of tan and black and white, rising up from the edges of the road or rising up from a nearby field. And these flocks are often made up of 1, 2, or 3 species. The two most common species are horned larks on the left and snow buntings on the right. Horned larks are small, long-bodied songbirds that actually walk on the ground rather than hopping like many birds do. They have yellow faces with black masks and tiny little black horns, which are, of course, really feathers. Many of Vermont's grassland birds are in significant, serious trouble. But horned larks are unique in their acceptance of row crops and their acceptance of heavily grazed, even overgrazed pasture land. In fact, they do really well on overgrazed or abused land. So their numbers in North America have probably increased since European civilization. If a big flock of little wintertime birds aren't mostly horned larks, chances are they're snow buntings, like the one on the right. The common or folk name for these birds, I really love. The common name used to be snowflakes, and that really fits. A flock of snow buntings in flight, like this one, can truly look like a snowstorm. Bernie and I saw this flock in Ferrisburg on a bitterly cold day. I think it was in February. An hour or so later, we passed a gigantic manure pile topped with a lot of old tires. And apparently the sun on the tires, the black tires, created a mini climate, and a flock of 250 or more snow buntings was taking advantage of the relative warmth right there. There are also some horned larks in there and a couple of one other kind of bird that I'll show you in just a second. Like horned larks, snow buntings are often found foraging for seeds alongside roads, near barns, and in agricultural fields. They also eat grass seed in some more unexpected places, like along the Burlington waterfront, or on the Rocky Point at the Shelburne Bay fishing access, or near the beach at Shelburne Farms, and all along the Colchester Causeway. These guys, I think, were at the end of Gage Road in Addison. The third little winter bird that's seen along roads and in agricultural fields is the Lapland longspur. And I thank Julie Filiberti for this picture. Most of the pictures today were taken by me or my partner, Bernie Paquette. And if anybody else took it, that person is credited on the slide. The name Lapland longspur tells us a lot. These birds are found in Arctic regions in Asia, North America, and Europe, including Lapland. And they're called long spurs because they have one elongated claw on the hind toe, although we don't usually see it. Lapland longspurs can be seen in Vermont from November, so pretty soon, through March, but in much smaller numbers than either of the two species we just saw. Usually just one or two mixed into a flock of horned larks or snow buntings. And they can be recognized by their rich plumage with quite a bit of chestnut color and the sort of complex head decoration with a dark below and above the eye, the back of the eye rather. It's always worth it to scan a flock like this, looking carefully for the one or two birds that are darker than all the rest. And there are a few in this one. There's one right here in the middle, and there may be one right here. As pretty as Lapland longspurs and snow buntings are, and horned larks, they are even prettier in their summer breeding plumage. And we never get to see that here because they breed so far north. So just check online or in your field guides and you'll see the male's full breeding glory. In addition to the large flocks of little birds that can be found along roadsides and in farm fields, winter can also bring flocks of birds to backyard feeders. And of course, we all know that. That's why we feed in the winter. And some of these flocks are made up of regulars, birds that breed here in Vermont, spend their whole lives here without migrating to warmer areas during our winter. And they would probably make it through our winters without our help. Birds usually hang out where there's enough natural food for them. But that said, they also appreciate high protein, high fat snacks like suet or seeds. I think everybody knows the first one on there, black-capped chickadees. They are just incredibly cute, and they are regulars at backyard feeders. Chickadees need lots of nutritious food to keep them going through the long, cold winters. So they take hundreds and hundreds of seeds and nuts and store them under bits of bark or in tree cavities. And amazingly, these little birds remember every single one of their many hiding places. They actually grow a part of their brain that deals with spatial reasoning and spatial memory. And then that part of their brain decreases in size in the spring and then grows again in the fall when they need it again. Very nifty system. Both white-breasted nuthatches and red-breasted nuthatches happily come to get seeds or peanuts. They really love this peanut feeder here. The red-breasted ones are smaller. They're petite, delicate little creatures. And these birds are more likely to stay near wooded areas, less likely to be seen in suburbia or cities. But we have noticed an increase in feeder visits from red-breasted nuthatches over the last few years. For the first 20 years I lived here, I never saw one, and now they're pretty regular in the winter. This tufted titmouse last year visited our feeders regularly, and you could always recognize titmice by the graybacks, unusually big eyes, and the little crest or tuft of feathers on their heads. This is another really cute bird. Blue jays love seeds and nuts too, to eat right now and to store for later. A blue jay can store 2 or 3 big acorns in his throat pouch, one more in its mouth and one more at the very tip of the bill. So it can carry 5 acorns at once to stash somewhere. We have watched a blue jay pick up as many as 10 unshelled peanuts at one time. Northern cardinals glow in the winter without all that distracting summertime foliage, like this female. And this male. I love this picture. The soft colors of mourning doves look beautiful against snow-covered landscape. Doves don't store food like chickadees or nuthatches or jays. So they have to eat large amounts of seed every single day, all winter long, to stay alive. We humans can help by putting out seed, but we can also help by leaving our dead flower heads standing instead of cutting them down, or worse, raking them all up and taking to the dump, because those flower heads are full of tiny, healthy seeds. The next bird also absolutely loves areas of dead flower heads. We have had a lot of American goldfinches in our front yard the last couple of days as the weather gets colder, eating the seeds from coneflower. They chow down on flower heads and grass seeds, and by the time the first snow falls, the males have lost their bright, bright yellow summer plumage. And both male and female goldfinches have much quieter colors, but they're still beautiful little birds. We might see 3 other kinds of finches at winter feeders. The word finch, by the way, just means a small seed-eating songbird. And I should say, by the way, if anyone has any questions, interrupt me. Otherwise, I get on a roll and just keep on going. House finch males are streaky birds with some areas of red-orange. And you can see that big, heavy, seed-cracking bill. The females don't have the brighter color at all. They're sort of pretty and restrained looking. Purple finches, according to the famous Roger Tory Peterson, the males look like sparrows dipped in raspberry juice, which is a very good description. And the females are similar to house finch females, except that they are much darker all over and have heavy whitish eyebrows. These are less common at our feeders here in Jericho Center than the house finches, but they do show up many, many winters. We also get a lot of woodpeckers that show up in the winter at feeders, particularly if you're feeding either nuts or suet. Hairy and downy woodpeckers look almost identical. This is a hairy. He's got a fairly long bill, probably almost as long as the width of his head. The downies are smaller. See how tiny its bill is? And have noticeably smaller bills. And the adult males of both species have that bit of red on their head. And pileated woodpeckers, or pileated, are huge. From one wingtip to the other is almost 30 inches. And ants are the most favorite food of pileated woodpeckers. They find ants in rotting wood. So we often see big, deep trenches in trees where the huge woodpeckers have been feasting. We had a family of 3 working on this tree for many, many, many days. Strangely enough, it didn't kill the tree. It did get rid of an awful lot of carpenter ants, though. This bird is a relative newcomer to the United States. Back in the 1800s, some homesick Englishmen living in New York City asked friends back home to send over cages of every single kind of bird mentioned in the plays and poems of William Shakespeare. Well, most of the poor displaced birds died, but a few apparently loved their new country, and their numbers exploded, like house sparrows, which used to be called English sparrows. But there are now millions of these European starlings in the US, and they often come to backyard feeders, although it seems sporadic. We'll get quite a few for a while and then none other times, and because they move around in flocks. They look mostly black from a distance, but have really beautiful colors seen up close: silver and turquoise and gold and tan and gold, yellow and black. And this is a very handsome picture of this bird. These are smart birds. They can be taught to sing. They can even be taught to speak, so it sounds like a little bit like a parrot. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart had a pet starling that he just loved and had taught to sing. And when the starling died, he was at the height of his popularity, and he demanded a state funeral for it. We can also see robins and bluebirds in the winter, especially in the Champlain Valley, but elsewhere also. Both species eat mostly fruit and insects, so they rarely come to backyard feeders. Every now and then, though, a hungry bluebird might be attracted by bits of suet, or if a person puts out mealworms during a particularly harsh winter. We might see the first 2 birds here on this list any time of the year here in Vermont, although they're not around everywhere and they're not easy to find every day. But the 3rd species is a winter visitor only. You will not find one in the summer in Vermont. White-throated sparrows are well named. Their white throats are always noticeable. But there are 2 kinds. One has black and white stripes on the top of the head, like this one, and the other has brown and tan stripes. And you might see both at your feeders. They're both the same species. And birds with black and white heads almost 100% of the time choose birds with brown and tan stripes as their mates, and vice versa. This is one of my most favorite birds, dark-eyed junco. They are really pleasing little birds with that neat dark gray and crisp white and little pink bills. Juncos are more often seen on the ground under feeders than on the feeders themselves. And this is an adult male. The female adults show much more brown than gray. But juncos as a whole have an incredible amount of variation. Black, brown, dark gray, lighter grays and browns, even all splotchy and mottled like these. The bottom right picture I sent to the Cornell lab asking what it was, and 2 of the people thought it might have been a hybrid between a white-throated sparrow and a junco, but then they decided no, it was just one of the many possibilities of juncos. If you see a junco in flight, you can always recognize it easily by those, they has white outer tail feathers. You can barely see them in these 2 photos. Now, tree sparrows nest and raise young on the far northern Canadian tundra. I saw them when I went birding way up in Churchill, Manitoba, right on the Hudson Bay. And they come down here to Vermont in the winter the way some Vermont humans head down to Florida. It's just so nice and warm here. You can recognize a tree sparrow by that little rusty cap and the little dark smudge in the middle of its chest. And if you look closely, you'll see that its bill is two different colors, dark on the top and yellow on the bottom. And these are another bird that does not save seed, so it has to eat, I think it's 3/4 of its weight in seed every single day to make it through a winter. I think it's something like that. In addition to our year-round birds and our regular expected winter visitors, winter can bring several species of now and then birds, eruptive species. The sudden appearance of big numbers of birds in areas where they aren't found every year, and possibly at great distance from their normal ranges, is called an eruption, spelled as it is on the top there. Fluctuation in food supplies are the most common reason for eruptions. Other possible reasons are a sudden upsurge in the population of a specific species due to the removal or absence of predators, or a population surge caused by an unusually plentiful food year during the breeding season. Every few years, Vermont feeders might get visited by pine siskins. They look sort of like streaky goldfinches with sharp pointed bills and short notched tails. They have a little bit of yellow edging on their wings and tail. In this photo, you can just see a bit of that subtle yellow on the wing and tail, but it shows up better here. When spruce, cone, and seed crops are poor, pine siskins wander south, and they start showing up in Vermont, sometimes as early as late October. They're often detected first by their wheezy calls, which is the best way to identify them in flight. They sound sort of like goldfinches that have something wrong with the way they're making their song or something. It's very odd, wheezy noise. Now, we Vermonters see cedar waxwings any month of the year, or we can anyway. They are beautiful, gregarious birds. They chow down on sumac berries and mountain ash and wild grapes and ornamental fruit trees. The cedar waxwings in our area know to the minute when our honeyberries and elderberries and grapes and what else do we have out there that they love? Taupe color overall, with black masks and black at the very top of their crests, a yellow tip of the tail, white and yellow edging on the wing feathers, and brick red under the tail. Both kinds of waxwings have a little drop of red, and it's really not a drop, it's part of their feathers on the wing, and that's what they got the name from. It looked to some people like sealing wax, the kind of thing that you put on a message and then stamp it with your ring or something. I always used to hear that these birds were given the name Bohemian to suggest an unconventional lifestyle, like Bohemians or gypsies, because they actually are wanderers or nomads. But I've read recently that the Latin word bohemica, which is part of their name, was part of their name way back in the 1500s, apparently because an early naturalist thought the birds actually came from Bohemia. Whatever, they're gorgeous. Here's another good-sized eruptive bird, evening grosbeaks, large, heavy-set members of the finch family with thick, powerful conical bills. They have thick necks, full chests, relatively short tails for a good-sized bird. The males are yellow, white, and black with pale bills and distinctive yellow eyebrow stripes. The females are lovely too, I think. They're more subtly marked with golden highlights on soft gray plumage. The numbers of these handsome birds have changed dramatically over the last 30 years. In the 1980s and early 90s, Vermonters could count on sizable groups of evening grosbeaks visiting their backyard feeders in the winter, often consuming many pounds of sunflower seed every day for weeks. Now it's exciting to see one or two or three of the big beauties. There was a major spruce budworm infestation in the last part of the 20th century, and evening grosbeaks love spruce budworms. And if there's a lot of spruce budworms around, they have very healthy litters or not litters, groups of babies anyway, and all of them are healthy and live. The explosive increase in the numbers of spruce budworms led to an explosive increase in the population of birds that feed on them. But then they started aerial spraying for spruce budworms in the United States and Canada, and the numbers of spruce budworms crashed. And that appears to have contributed to the decline in numbers of evening grosbeaks. But there is some indication that they're coming back. They love sunflower seeds, and they prefer platform feeders like this to tube feeders because they really can't get those huge bills into the holes on tube feeders. With their enormous bills or gross beaks, they can crush seeds that are too large and tough for some of the smaller winter finches. And the smaller winter finches know that, so they seek out the grosbeaks and glean the scraps that they leave behind. Pine grosbeaks are year-round residents in northern Eurasia, Canada, and along the Rocky Mountains. But again, during eruption years, these birds show up in Vermont in fairly large groups, usually where there are ornamental crabapple trees. By late winter, the small apples are withered and soft, and apparently just delicious to pine grosbeaks, like this handsome male. South Burlington's Technology Park is a great place to look for this species during an eruption winter. A feeding flock often stays near a single tree or group of trees until all of the fruit is consumed and the trees are just about bare. This is an immature male, fledged the summer before we saw him. Females have no red or pink and more of that goldy color. Pine grosbeaks are unusually tolerant of humans getting close to them, talking about them, talking to them, photographing them, admiring them. Because of the apparent tameness and the slow-moving behavior of these birds, in Newfoundland, a local name for pine grosbeaks is mope, as in there was a flock of mope here yesterday. But mope or not, they're gorgeous. And I think these pictures were taken 2 years ago in early March, late winter, at Technology Park. And I think Bernie took about 200 pictures of pine grosbeaks that day from not very far away, and the birds did not seem to pay any attention. During an eruption year, you might find that your backyard feeders attract scores, even hundreds, of redpolls. Redpolls are lively, social birds, almost always seen in fairly large groups that almost never stop moving. Even at night, members of the flock fidget and twitter. And when they're at a feeder or a stand of winter weeds, the activity is almost dizzying. In size, redpolls are close to or slightly larger than American goldfinches. Actually, they range quite a lot. Some of them appear to be slightly smaller. Both males and females have that little red forehead patch, or polls, that gave them their name. This is a female. This is a male, distinguished by his pink bib. I found this little bird lying upside down on the frozen ground one morning, apparently dead. I brought him inside and put him in a box and left him alone for about an hour, very near our nice warm wood stove. And then I heard fluttering inside the box. After another half hour, I took the box outside and held the little bird on my palm and was delighted to see him make an energetic jump and then fly off across the yard. The redpoll didn't appear to be injured, so my guess is that it had either flown against the house or been hit out of the sky by a predator, such as a hawk, and had fallen stunned to the ground, and it had almost frozen to death. These little birds don't freeze to death easily. They can survive temperatures down to 65 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. During winter, they sometimes tunnel into the snow to stay warm during the night. One early morning a few winters ago, I noticed that the foot-deep snow on my barn roof was heaving and shaking. As I watched, totally not understanding, 18 little redpolls emerged, shook off the snow, and flew down to the feeders. Some studies show that redpolls eat almost nothing but birch seeds in the winter, except in those winters when birch seeds aren't plentiful north of here. And then they come south to Vermont and they chow down on backyard feeders. They're tiny, but they are voracious. They eat up to 42% of their body mass every single day. Vermont bird lovers used to wonder if one of the redpolls at their feeders might be a different species, a hoary redpoll. Hoary meaning like hoarfrost. They look like they're dipped in frost. The paler bird on the right looked to me something like a hoary redpoll. But after years and years of debate and studies, genetic studies in the last year, I think, showed that there is only one species of redpoll, and now they're all just called redpoll, not common redpoll and hoary redpoll, without any qualifiers, just redpoll. This is a white-winged make predictions about what birds might erupt south, depending on what kind of seeds there are a lot of up there that summer. And birders in the U.S. eagerly await the annual finch forecast. You can Google annual finch forecast 2024 and get the information. This year, there were average birch and alder crops up north in Canada, so that the birds that prefer these seeds probably will stay in Canada. And a good white spruce cone crop will probably keep the crossbills north. And pine siskins are also likely to remain north of Vermont. The finch forecast, however, predicts a moderate flight of evening grosbeaks southward this winter, which would be great. It's always a treat to get them at our feeders. And then I know this was going to be primarily about little birds, but there's one more bird that might show up at our feeders, not as part of a flock, always alone, always exciting. Imagine that you are an owl. You live by catching mice or voles or moles, or maybe a red squirrel from time to time. But in winter, all these little creatures are running around in tunnels under the snow. But you have unbelievably good hearing. So good that you can hear where a mouse is, even under many inches of snow. But now imagine that the snow is covered with a layer of ice. You hear the mouse with your awesome owl hearing, and you know just where it is, and you drop down with your sharp talons extended, but you can't break through the ice quickly enough, and the mouse escapes. In winters where there is a layer of ice, or sometimes where there's a very deep snow cover, owls can starve to death, and people find them lying barely alive, and the large bird rehabilitators in the state work overtime. Barred owls have figured out that small rodents like mice sometimes dig themselves out of their tunnels so they can pick up dropped seeds around backyard feeders. So the owls show up too, waiting in nearby trees like this one, seen next to our driveway during one long, cold and snowy winter. The bird finally ended up taking a rabbit, which is unusually large prey for a bird that usually swallows his food whole. And he or she is looking at us. We were right there in the window, and that bird was not going to leave that rabbit. I think it had been a while since it had eaten. Unlike many owls, barred owls can be seen in broad daylight. We saw this beauty a few minutes past noon at Shelburne Bay Park, and it just kept looking at us and then looking away and then looking at us. And I don't know if it was signaling boredom with humans or really wanting us to go. Great horned owls aren't often seen near backyard feeders, partly because they're much more nocturnal than barred owls, and also because they're less common. We hear them here in the winter, but I've never seen one in the backyard. But a friend told me about having a great horned owl in a tree in his backyard with a cardinal right above it. The smaller bird did not seem worried about the huge bird, but it did seem to be wanting to be in a place where it could keep an eye on it. Watching birds during Vermont's frosty winters, it is diverse and enjoyable, and for many people, sort of unexpected. You can watch your backyard feeders, see things like this adorable little tree sparrow, snug in your home while the birds brave the snow and the cold. Or you can venture out. You can find birds along dirt roads and agricultural fields. I'm not sure where this is. Or you could roam the woods, looking maybe for a feeding flock of crossbills or redpolls or something. And sometimes when you're in the woods, you might be using the Merlin app. These birders are checking to see what Merlin has heard around them as they birded at the Jericho Research Forest in the winter. That's an astonishing app that's free. If you haven't tried it, it might be wise to give it might be fun rather, to give it a chance. It's not 100% accurate, but it certainly opens people's eyes to how much bird activity there is around them. You can hang out in the parking lot under the bridge to New York State. There it is, that big night, and it's always shoveled out like that. Or you can brave the wind and walk up to the sidewalk on the bridge to look for diving ducks and grebes and loons. There are all great ways to get outside in the fresh air at a time of year where many of us spend much too much time indoors. Of course, you will need to wear many more layers than you think can possibly be necessary. Tights, long johns, fleece, wool, polypro, wind pants, headbands, hats, scarves, glove liners, mittens, insulated boots. Sometimes not even your best friends will be able to recognize you, but you'll be cozy. And then, once you're properly garbed, go out and brave the elements and enjoy winter birding. Cold and windy, wet, and wonderful. So thank you, and I'd love to hear about some winter birding that some of you have done.
Thank you, Mav. That was just very interesting.
I can hardly wait for winter now.
No, that's what I was thinking.
I'm going to just take a minute to plug something, a project of mine that has taken years and years and years. I started writing novels when I was 10 or 11, I think. It was a thrilling mystery involving a stolen jar of peanut butter and a poor homeless man who was living under the coal cellar of our house, not in real life, but in the novel. And then I self-published 2 novels in the early 2000s. And then I started working on a series of romance novels, love stories of the Burlington Bird Club. The club and its members are all fictitious, but the birds and many of the birding locations will be familiar to many Vermonters. The first book in this series A First for Ivy Pritchard, can be ordered through most independent bookstores. And it's available online through Barnes & Noble, Amazon, Kobo, and a few other sites. Some of the sites offer only ebooks, others only paperbacks, and others both. This book, of which I am very proud, features a woman who owns a shop for bird lovers and who is quite comfortable in her mid-30s with a solitary life. And a surly and disillusioned man who was hurt both emotionally and physically by his first experience of love. And a lost little bird who ends up a few thousand miles from any others of its kind, and who brings lasting change to the lives of the humans. The second in the series, Beck's Grouse, will be released January 27th. As the title suggests, it's a grouse this time that triggers change. This time in the lonely life of a widow who is still grieving after 5 years, and a widower who is still grieving after more than 20 years. And readers will recognize both characters from A First for Ivy Pritchard. They're regulars in the birding club. And just this morning, I finished the third book in this series, finished revising, editing, revising again, editing some more, etc. Right now, the working title is An Easy Little Love Affair, but I'm not sure that's what it's going to be. But that's all the main character Rose wanted. No more rich guys with horses and power boats and 2 cars, one for the summer and one for the winter. She just wants to meet a nice man and get to know him and fall in love and get married and stay married. And she finds him. But then her job interferes, and his job interferes, and her mother's broken arm interferes, and an accident interferes, and more and more and more. Rose's nice, simple little love affair is wonderful, but complicated. But of course, the book and the couple have a happy ending. I think we all need happy endings nowadays. So thank you for listening to my promotional spiel. I like writing a whole lot more than I like promoting. But so
Does anyone have any questions or stories about winter birding? I'll say that several years we've had a barred owl in a tree right near our deck and our feeder. Just
oh, nice.
waiting.
That happened only that 1 year here. We found one dead in front of the house once, which was sad. It had been hit by a car. But only that 1 year did we have one that was clearly looking to eat the critters that came out at night to eat the seed. And it was a real treat to see it.
Hi, hey, Mav, right? Not Maeve.
Mav in my family, yes.
Okay.
There are Maves, yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm not really a birder, but I love to go out with people that know birds. You know, I have a friend who, in this Rutland Audubon group, Kathy Guinness, and they go out on this preserve they made in West Rutland, I think.
Yep, the West Rutland Marsh.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I went with them in January or February. It was really cold, below zero. And with this whole group of birders, and it was very interesting. I can see why you could write novels about birders. You know, I could really see that, and knowing my friend too.
Right.
And we saw some snow buntings that day, and they were the people were so excited about seeing those snow buntings fly over the field. You know, so
Nice.
Yeah.
You said that you're not really a birder, and it always reminds me of one of the most famous birders in the United States is Ken Kaufman. And he said one time, everybody always says that. I'm not really a birder or a birder. And he said, if you like birds, you're a birder. If you really like looking at birds, you're a good birder.
Okay, so I guess I'm a birder, not a good birder.
I liked that.
And I like to
do
go
not
out
have to be
in
an
the winter, so it's a great reason to go out. And I like to
Yes.
see other people's enthusiasm for the birds.
Definitely. And that Rutland Audubon group is a very knowledgeable and enthusiastic group, right?
Yeah, yes.
Right. Well, thank you again.
Thank you for coming.
You're welcome. I'm going to stop sharing. Yep. And I don't know how to get out. I know how to get out in Zoom, but not here. Oh, I just give up. Okay, that's easy.
Thanks a lot for doing this, Mav. It was great.
You're welcome. I enjoyed it too.